Hi, I'm Christopher Walker with Closely Observed Teaching, and this is my second entry in my FutureLearn diary. In this video I'm going to talk about modern building design, a course presented by the University of Bath. This is a 3-week course. So, what did this course look at? Well, it was split across these 3 weeks, and each week looked at a slightly different topic. The first week concentrated on raising awareness of the environmental impact that buildings have, that having too much heating in a building can cause problems, problems with insulation, just problems in construction of the building itself. These can all add to the impact that buildings have on climate change, and it was quite surprising just how big that impact was, but I'll come back to that in a minute. The second week looked at the use of different materials and modern materials technology. This was pretty fascinating as well. So they were talking about, for example, using fabric as a way of moulding concrete into more interesting shapes, but also how using this fabric causes the concrete to actually be stronger than it would have been otherwise. I mean, they take the fabric off at the end, but the concrete, because of the way it settles into the fabric, it actually works better as a material. So that was really interesting as well. The third week lost the plot a little bit. It was about building information management systems, or BIM. And the idea here was that it's important to have data about buildings and how they're used, but it didn't seem to have the same sort of focus the first 2 weeks. And it ended up being a little bit like an advert for the university. So, what about the level of difficulty on the course? Well, some prior knowledge seemed to be assumed, especially as we went into the second week. It was assumed that you would know a little bit about architecture and about buildings in general, and maybe about some of the material science that went into things. I think you could still get something from like 80% of the content if you didn't know anything going in, but it helped to have some of that background knowledge, and if you don't have it, it would be useful to find out a little bit. So prepare to have a Google tab open as you're doing the course. Three things that I learned on this course. The first one, you know, I love new items of vocabulary, and I'm always keen to expand my knowledge there. So I learned the term brise-soleil. Brise-soleil is basically, if you see like a big modern building, like a glass building, you might see these wooden slats on the front, and you think, oh, that's pretty. Well, actually, they serve a purpose. They're to kind of regulate the heat coming through the glass, and they make they have a big effect on the quality of living in the building itself. Buildings are nicer to use if you have that sort of thing. Now, I've seen these sort of things around. I didn't know what the purpose was, and I certainly didn't know the name, so that was nice to learn that. The second thing that I learned that was kind of surprising was that the so-called average room temperature has changed. Now, when I was at school doing physics classes, we always had to assume standard room temperature and pressure whenever we were doing an experiment, and for me that room temperature was 20 degrees Celsius. Well, it seems that the average has kind of risen a little bit, and it's an interesting effect, and it's a little bit like they say about helmets for cyclists. Cyclists aren't as safe these days as they were when they didn't wear helmets, because people drive faster, they drive closer to cyclists, they think, oh, they're protected, they've got helmets. It's the same with modern buildings. People think, oh, you know, it's not that expensive to heat my building, so I'm just going to heat it a bit more. And they'll knock the temperature up to 22 instead of just not having heating on at all. I thought it was quite interesting when the lecturer said, if your building's a bit cold, think about putting on a jumper first. That was good. And then the third thing that I learned was just how energy inefficient modern buildings are. A lot of buildings just aren't great at managing energy, and it was quite a standout moment when the presenter said that looking at modern buildings and their energy efficiency, they're not much better than Victorian era periods in terms of the design ethos there. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. So For EFL teachers, first of all, is this a teachable course? And I would say yes, but it will require you to have the right student for the course. They'll need to be motivated, really interested in the topic, and they will need a high level of proficiency in English, I would say. You might not do all 3 weeks of the course. You might find that the students lose interest, or you might find that it's just not necessary to go through every single thing. What about the presentation? Well, this was kind of the weakest element of the course. There was a lot of stuff in here that was interesting, but it just wasn't presented in a way that I thought was as good as it could have been. And it certainly wouldn't be as good as you'd want it to be for an EFL class. For example, the videos were often very interesting, but they were also very long. I think that the ideal length for a FutureLearn video, certainly if you want to teach from it, would be between 2 and 3 minutes. That's long enough to make one point and to support that point with examples so that the point comes across clearly. I think that's how FutureLearn should work. You introduce a point, you make an example, and then you move on. Later then you can reinforce it, and then you add other points along the way. Trying to add 4 or 5 different points in 1 week, not in 1 week, but in one step of a course within a week, I think that doesn't really suit the approach of FutureLearn. And that's the problem here. Some of the videos were just too long. The manner of the presentation was sometimes lacking a little bit. You'd have people who were clearly very competent when it came to their job and their field. They knew a lot. They were highly qualified people, but they weren't very good video presenters. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need a typical YouTuber to present these videos, but I think that it would certainly help to have somebody who's a little bit more relaxed in front of the camera. In terms of the articles themselves, I think that some of these were overlong, and they were also written in a way that would require some unraveling for students. Now, this is good in a respect because that's the way the world is. Not everything that's written will be immediately understandable, and your students need to be aware of that. But if you're trying to teach the topic rather than just the language, you might find that there were better ways of putting things. Some of the sentences were really clunky, didn't really fit very well within a paragraph. They're not going to be great examples for your students to learn from. And then when it comes to the sequencing on the course, generally I thought it was okay, but I think that sometimes, especially in week 3, there were things that were not particularly relevant or interesting within the scope of the course and could certainly have been cut. I mean, this feels like a 2-week course masquerading as a 3. So yeah, I mean, there was a bit of an issue there. Having said that, in week 3, when the focus seemed to switch more to what the University of Bath could offer future students of architecture, I kind of got the impression that some of my students would benefit from this. People in the discussion boards didn't seem to take too kindly to the advert nature of this, but I have a lot of students who are at about the age where they need to decide about their university choices. I think they would appreciate this. So what about the interactivity? Well, the discussion boards were pretty lively. People were putting lots of comments in. There were plenty of opportunities for people to do that. One of the things that I liked was when the article asked you for examples of a particular kind of building or a building that you thought was interesting, and people were posting some pretty original ideas in the comments. So I got to know about buildings that I didn't know existed because I've not been to that particular city. So I think that was good. And students on the course, if you're teaching an EFL teacher with students, the students would then be able to personalise a bit and talk about places in their own country that would otherwise not be mentioned. So that kind of benefits everybody really. So I think that would be good. The quizzes were pretty good in places, especially week 2. I think week 2 was the best for the quizzes. Week 1 there was a bit of an over-reliance on the same sort of, they had these multiple choice check boxes where there were 4 things and you had to say which ones were true. A lot of the time all 4 things were true. That kind of takes away from the quiz element. If all the answers are right, it doesn't really test your knowledge, does it? So, on to the final recommendation, my grades then. The course itself, I enjoyed it. I looked past its weaknesses and its shortfalls, its shortcomings. I would say that it deserves a 4-star rating, because it was good. I've learned something, and I look back fondly on the things that I studied on this course. As for the EFL grade, I'm going to give it, I'm going to give it 3 stars. I think that it is something that can be taught from. I think you'll have to pick and choose what you teach on the course. And then when it comes to the CEFR level, I'm going to say at least C1 level. You need somebody who is good at breaking apart a sentence to get at its meaning. And you might find that in some parts of the videos, C2 level would be required. I haven't looked at this course yet with any of my own students. I have recommended it to one because I've got a student who's very interested in architecture, but I'm waiting for feedback there. I could post an update or maybe a comment below if I learn something new there that's of interest. Okay, so that's the end of this review. That's the second FutureLearn course that I've done since I joined their unlimited subscription service. If you like this video, please like it. If you found the topic itself interesting and you would like to see more of these videos, then subscribe, maybe click the notification bell. And as you can see, here I am at Irenka Cafe here in Bielsko. They have great coffee, they have great cake. If you'd like to support me and support what I'm doing here, then consider buying me a coffee. There's a link in the description below. And well, that's about it from me. Until next time. I better crack on with my studies so I can do part 3 of this series, huh?